So here's the question that I have for you all today.
Okay.
And here's the thing. I was sitting at home thinking about this question, and my atmosphere inspired the question itself.
Ooh, okay.
So what I'm wondering, and it's going to just seem so weird, is if you could design your perfect chair, like you know how everybody has a chair that they sit in to like read or do different things.
Yes.
And everyone's very specific about their chair. What would your chair be like?
Someone else is going to have to go first on this one. I have no idea.
Well, so I'm trying to think through the lenses of things that I want in a chair.
Right. And why?
And why.
Like
that is the question.
Right.
Well, and how do I leverage it? Is it functional, or am I going mainly for, like, am I going after function or am I going after form?
You decide.
I know, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Hence my process. You give me guff for like not understanding.
Guff? Don't give him guff.
What is guff?
Like, for instance, here's an example. Mine would have flat sides so that I can set my coffee on it.
Okay.
Like, does this have to be a real chair, or we can add like any feature possible to this thing?
Wow, this was maybe a bad question.
Think of your audience.
Okay, in my chair, I would want it to be able to be a height, like up high, so I could have like a standing desk thing, or it needs to be able to go down low.
Yes.
It also should be able to recline, and it should be in the form of a mid-century modern style.
Come on.
Can you illuminate what that might look like for me?
Think about Mad Men and their chairs in that show. Did you ever watch it? Oh my gosh.
Dude, mid-century modern, obviously.
Frank Lloyd Wright. Okay, never mind.
I'll look it up later.
Okay, sure. Anyway,
there's some things
but also
in this room that are that have some
mid-century. Like this table is kind of a mid-century modern replica.
Okay.
Like simplicity, straight lines.
Love it.
And
circles.
Yes, it has to have a spot for me to put my coffee.
Yeah, that's so important.
Like
but is yours like a cup holder?
No, it would be flat. No, it would not be
like a flat arm.
Yes, a flat arm.
Me too. That's the only thing.
You're like, it could be any chair really. It just needs a flat arm.
But yours sounds very swivelly. Like it can go up and down and forward.
Yeah,
I don't want that. I don't want that. I want it to force me to sit up straight.
Yes. So mine needs a great lumbar support, 100%.
Because you recently turned 80.
Yeah. Because my back will die. And then also,
how's the lumbar support on this couch right now?
Do you know those chairs that have wheels on the bottom of them?
Yeah, those are the worst.
Not that, because I can't like sit still, but I also want it to be swivelly. So one that is stationary, but one that I can turn and go just side to side and swivel in it.
That.
Yeah, just like that. Turn side to side and swivel in it. And then, high lumbar support. And then I think I'd want it to be able to raise up and down according to whatever height I need it, so I can take it to any table that is possible. And it needs
very mobile chair.
And it needs to be portable, so I can fold it
anywhere. Okay.
You're like, it fits in my pocket.
These are not the answers I was expecting, and I really appreciate how seriously you're taking this. I was thinking like, I'd want mine to be like fuzzy so it's comfy. I can use it, put my coffee on it, and it fits like two people or something.
But here's the
like
deal.
Some kind of fun
I think mine will be
description.
more like that.
The premise of the question was that everyone thinks about this, and I've never thought about this in my life. So
No. The premise of the question is I was sitting in my chair and I was like, this is such an imperfect chair. There's so many things I would change.
At your house?
Yes, I have this Sherpa covered chair. Sherpa material. It's like
sounds
curly.
really bougie.
Oh, okay,
It's like curly kind of.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
And it's just a weird texture, and it doesn't have anything flat, and it kind of makes you go like concave.
Did your husband buy
when you
it? Was
sit in
that
it.
why?
No, I did.
You leave yourself to blame? I was about to let you pass it off on Jono, but
It's imperfect.
I've never found a perfect chair.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, Malls, if you had to design your perfect chair.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking more similar qualities to what you were probably imagining.
Right.
I would say like a fuzzy kind of like velvety type
Ooh,
of
come
like, material,
on.
you know, like not suede, but like suede velvet.
What
like,
color?
Okay, well, right now it would be like burnt orange because I have this burnt orange pillow in my room and it's the only burnt orange thing in my whole room, but I need something else to tie it together.
Yes.
And that's like the extent of my like interior decorating knowledge. But so it would be a burnt orange chair. It'd be like velvety suede kind of material. I don't know if there's a name for that, little crossover. It would be wide enough to where I could put my legs up like sideways on
me
it
too.
or like cross-legged.
Like you can get snuggled in or you can just sit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's like sturdy and firm enough to like feel like I'm not sinking into it. I don't necessarily know if I need somewhere to put my coffee on the chair itself, as long
I love
as
this variation.
It could be somewhere near, I think it would need to be near like an end table or something where I could put it. And it definitely needs arms and no height specification really, other than just like average, like to put my legs down, you know, like average chair height.
Average to who? Like Shaquille O'Neal? Or like
I guess like, I don't know,
your average height. So like
store chair.
Standard.
It could have like a cup holder that you press a little button and it pops in and out. So like almost like a CD drive, you know?
He wants it to be more
I
complicated.
don't really want it to have like gadgets on it though. Like if it could be like invisible, maybe.
I'm just saying
Josh,
it could
like, you
be.
can make this way more fun.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like in the Santa Claus when the cocoa dispenser comes out.
Oh yeah.
Of the sleigh.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of.
CD, compact disc, cocoa dispenser.
So what I'm
That's
getting
one of the dumbest and most dated jokes about that movie.
such a good movie though.
The best Christmas movie. I know we're like past, but
What I'm getting out of the answers to this question is that this is my worst question I've ever asked.
No, it's fine. Ken, I want to affirm your question.
I had fun.
I was expecting something different.
I'm sorry we
Like, are
disappointed
you trying to like
Dude.
discover what our own aesthetics are? For,
Basically,
okay,
yeah.
there you go.
I was like, what makes you feel comfy? What
I
makes you
see.
feel happy to
I
look
see.
at?
Well,
Okay, the comfiest chair is a beanbag chair.
Dude,
100%.
yes.
But not efficient.
Oh, I
But comfy.
love a beanbag chair.
Yes, I
It's not
love
comfortable,
beanbag
like,
chairs.
for your
Oh,
back.
and secondary, lawn chairs. Big fan of lawn chairs.
Yeah, our camp chairs.
Yeah, camp chairs.
All right. Well, anyway, unrelated to today's topic, entirely unrelated, unless anyone can think of a way that we can make this be related.
maybe sitting with someone, having a conversation.
Little sneak peek to what we're talking about, but I'll come out and say it. Today we get to have a conversation about sharing the gospel with people and doing that without being weird, hopefully, and doing that without being a hypocrite.
yes.
And this, I think, is one of our most restless topics yet, actually,
Yeah, I think
because
so.
this is the kind of thing that will give you a pit in your stomach to imagine doing,
Right.
even if you've been a Christian your whole life, or even if you're super comfortable with chatting with people. It's just a very unique conversation to have.
Totally.
So I'm excited to talk about having that conversation with you guys.
Totally.
Yeah, I love it.
And it's one of those things that if you think you're doing it right, you might be doing it really wrong. Like if you have an over amount of confidence about how you do it, it might be one of the things that you're not doing very well.
I feel
So
like we've said that before on this podcast. Like if you think you know the answer, you probably don't.
yeah, very
Oh,
convoluted.
Cuts deep.
I don't know.
Yep.
Do I have to cut this joke? But
Love
it kind
that.
of makes me think about sex. Like, if you're like overly confident in how you're doing it, you're like probably doing it wrong.
Sex, sharing the gospel.
Maybe
Oh,
that
it's
we could
good.
title it that.
How sex is like sharing the gospel.
We're not cutting that joke.
I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Only two of us here are married, so you know, only two of us get that joke.
Yeah, you guys don't get it at all. There's no way you.
I don't even know what sex is.
That's for our next podcast.
Oh, okay,
sorry,
okay.
Yeah.
Joshua.
That's for our next podcast.
Sounds good. When I get older.
On your 81st birthday.
Oh, good callback. That was good, Mal. That was pro level podcasting. So when you guys think about this idea of sharing the gospel, like what are some of those like fears or questions that come up for you around this topic?
Yeah, I think my initial gut is when people, particularly in our modern time periods, think like they hear from like a pastor or like professional religious people like us, like, hey, you need to share your faith. Like there is this kind of modern assumption, or at least like modern sensibility, or like what is kind or what is culturally polite. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Mm-hmm. That isn't this just being pushy? Am I just like needlessly pushing my own agenda on someone, on something, on you? And if someone receives it as such, as me just like pushing my agenda on them, does that actually drive them farther away from Jesus rather than do the thing that I'm hoping to do, which is draw them close? Yeah. Like that's the first kind of thought as to like when you're running through the, like, I feel like I want to talk to this person about Jesus. That's, at least in my mind, that's like one of the first things that comes up.
Yeah. It's like fear that it will push them away.
Yeah. Or it's going to be seen as me being overly aggressive or whatever. So
that makes me think about like, okay, if that's true, if sharing our faith and sharing the gospel with someone is.
If you are hearing this online right now, there is construction and building.
Just live in real time.
Just so you know.
Or a dinosaur upstairs. Can't tell the difference.
That's what it sounds like. It's really hardcore.
It's better than it was the other day. So if sharing your faith with someone is being too pushy or pushing someone away, the alternative would be to not ever share that. Right. And I think playing that kind of thought out is helpful for me when I think, okay, if this feels restless in some way and gives me anxiety of thinking, I don't want someone to feel pressured, I don't want someone to feel overwhelmed. Okay, then the alternative would be to not do that and to simply just live my life and exist and hope that someday someone will magically figure out like that I'm a Christian or something. And I think that's actually helpful to kind of balance it out and think in some way, shape, or form, like we gotta at least like let people in on what we claim to be the most important thing of our lives and the thing that kind of guides our decisions and actions and motivation and all of that. And there's got to be a way to do that without it being pushy.
Well, and I think the thing that we tend to do, or that we've tended to do, is like share the gospel at all times and when necessary use words.
Yeah,
like,
I was just thinking that.
Like it's like
people overquote like Francis of Assisi.
Yes. It's like this notion that in order to share the gospel, all you have to do is live like you have to live like Jesus, and your actions can exemplify that. And then that almost like, in a way, it's almost gone to the other end of like, well, then I never share it with words. Because one, it could be too pushy, like you were saying, Garrett, or it could just be uncomfortable, or it's more difficult to do something like that. And so because it's easier to just kind of tell ourselves, oh yeah, I'm doing it with how I live. But the reality is a lot of times we're not doing it with how we live, and it's not actually showing anyone the gospel, and we're not acting that different than anyone else. And so it is this like tension of like, I think that sometimes I think that's a super real thing that, share the gospel and how we act and how we live. But sometimes I think we use that as an excuse to not do it at all.
Sure.
Because of the very reasons you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's an invitation. Like you are sharing something that someone else on the receiving end gets to decide whether they want to like accept and follow and like live in the same way. It's not this, I think we get to share the gospel in such a way that invites people rather than like enforces people or makes people feel like trapped.
Right.
And I think that's helpful, that like if someone feels like that you're pushing your faith on them, then maybe it is in how we're delivering it.
Totally.
And so I think like presenting this as simply sharing your experience and sharing an invitation can help people respond and receive it differently.
Right. Because I think there is a particular vision that's being uncovered in like at least my own insecurity around that, which is I've seen the gospel shared in a particular way, and it is pushy, and it does push people away.
Right.
And it totally sucks.
Right.
You know, like, so So I feel like that's part of the equation, that the model is what I hear you saying, kind of Molly, like the model by which that we've shown people how to share the gospel, or we've told people this is what it means to share the gospel, is going to be damaging and is going to be pushing people away. Right.
Yeah. Like the helpful thing about asking this question is that sometimes we are pushing people away.
Right.
Yes. We are, I mean, like this whole conversation is about, we are either being hypocritical or we are being weird. And so in a way, it's a really helpful question, like not to the point that it should stop us from trying or from figuring out what is actually a helpful and seamless way to talk about the thing that is, like Molly's saying, the most important thing in our life.
Right.
But it is a good question to ask yourself.
Right. So like, what would you guys like, what would you tell me? Like if I'm a person and I'm like, I don't really want to, like, I feel uncomfortable doing it. Like sharing, like I don't know, like, what would you tell me? You know, like I have my own thoughts on that, but like, I would be curious I'm just curious what you guys have to think about it.
I think I'd say a few things at first. I think I'd ask a lot of questions about why you feel that way or what is causing you to feel that way. I think first of all, I would say that being uncomfortable isn't necessarily a reason to not do something. And it's probably is going to be uncomfortable, especially if it's one of the first times or you haven't done it a lot to share your faith with people. That is an uncomfortable thing to do because it's pretty vulnerable and it's pretty like you're putting yourself out there, and there is a fear of rejection that I think comes up in people because they don't want to be looked at weird, or they don't want to be rejected, or they don't want them to like or be pushed away from what they're trying to invite people into. But I think I would ask about more so like what is the way that you approach that, and what makes you feel like you're being pushy in your faith, and like really what are you inviting people into when you are trying to share that with them? And why might that make someone feel uncomfortable? And trying to get at the root of that a little bit, because I think that we just kind of feel like it's uncomfortable because it's unnatural. But I think that there is a genuine way to share your faith with someone in a way that is kind and loving, and in a way that isn't pushy, but is a conversation that isn't just, here's my belief, like, take it. And so I feel like it kind of gets at, like, how have we been taught to do this thing? And has that been helpful? Like, has that been harmful? And we might, I mean, a lot of people might not know any other way than the way that they've been taught. And I think that's, I mean, obviously why we're talking about this, but part of what I would talk about.
I think I would also just validate, classic Kenna, validate that like it is hard and it is uncomfortable. And that's okay. And there are a lot of ways, and I'm sure we'll get to so many throughout the course of this whole conversation today, ways to make it more comfortable and to go in with like a certain posture about it and all kinds of things. But it is deeply personal. And it begs a lot of questions of someone and their deepest beliefs. And that is pretty sacred territory to get into with somebody. And so I think there's actually something really, really helpful about validating that it's hard. It's a deep topic. For a lot of people, there's a lot of pain there. And so I don't think we should go into it like it's the easiest conversation in the world. And I think if we're waiting for it to feel like that, we never will. I think even a lot of times for pastors, or like you say, Garrett, professional Christians, it's still a really tricky thing to do. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And so I think recognizing and validating, like, it is kind of hard. It is kind of uncomfortable. Let's do it anyway. And let's come at the conversation in the most like open, loving, prepared way that we can.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think starting with your story and your experience with God and your understanding of how God has brought healing into your life or transformation into your life, I think that can bring a lot of confidence in a sense of like, I think, which a lot of the restlessness comes from like maybe what we don't know.
Right.
And so starting with what we know, and what you know as a Christian is how God has brought you to himself, like how he has healed you, how he has transformed you, how you have experienced the Holy Spirit, how you have experienced prayers being answered, like how you have seen the hope of Jesus in the world. Yeah. And no one else can say that except for you, and like no one can share the ways that I've seen God move in my life except for me.
Right.
And so just sharing that, and I think one like kind of caveat in that is we talk a lot in the like Christian culture about like sharing your testimony and sharing your story. And I have found in my experience in small groups and whatever that it often becomes like a glorification of our mistakes or a glorification of our sin, however we want to talk about it. And like, I don't know, maybe put yourself in the shoes of someone who you're sharing with.
Right.
Like, what do you think they want to hear?
Right.
They don't want to hear necessarily like you're really like really difficult past and all these things.
Like, I hear someone tell their testimony, I'm like, actually, like you're just making a really good case for how awesome your life was.
Like I was partying all the time. I was having way too much fun.
So that's just like a helpful lens to kind of look through before maybe you share some of that stuff. I don't want to say like focus on the brokenness, but like allow the things that God has done to be at the forefront and the center of what you share. Right. So if like you struggled with, I don't know, like a really difficult relationship with alcohol and now you experience like freedom from that, I think highlighting how God has met you there and the things that God has offered you and healed you in, as opposed to focusing on like a broken relationship with something or with someone. And that to me is a really really cool starting place to feel confident in what you're sharing, because you can own that and you can speak from your like authentic experience
that's
with the Lord.
The way that I was thinking about it, if I was telling my thinking about it in my sense, it's like starting in a similar place where Ken was saying was, I was told the gospel in lots of ways that sucked. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to perpetuate my own story, right? You know, so like as many things that we've talked about on this podcast and show like multiple times, there's so much of your own self in there. So I think that would be one of the first things I would say is like, if you're hesitant to that, is there some sort of your own personal journey or narrative that's telling me, hey, like, there was actually damage done there and like, let God heal that or whatever. And the second thought is this and it goes back to another conversation we had a couple weeks ago, which is, do I actually think the good news is like good news?
Yep.
Right. So like, what do you feel like you have to tell someone? And if you're embarrassed by it, like you should probably reevaluate.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like if the reason why you're not sharing it and you feel like it's going to be pushy, is because it's pushy, then that means it's a crappy gospel. Or at least you think it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And most likely if it is like some version of the gospel, I mean, like you can go back and listen to the What is the Gospel video or listen to that podcast. Yeah, there's lots of ways to talk about what God did in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus that's going to feel crappy, you know, to anyone that's listening and hearing. And so I think that would be a spot to go back to, because if it is really good news, like to the point of like the idea that N.T. Wright talks about in Simply Good News is like, you're announcing a new reality of something that has utterly shifted and changed the trajectory of the world, if not maybe the universe, then of course you're going to want to talk about it.
Yep.
Right? Like, but if it's just mediocre advice, like it's better for you to go to heaven than it is to go to hell, like that's not that compelling.
Right.
You know, but if it's like, no, Jesus has a plan and story for your life, has defeated death in the cross, and there is a new reality and a new way to be human.
Available right now.
Right now, in this exact moment, and carrying into eternity, where you can start setting everything in the world to rights, including the ways that you feel hurt and broken. Like, man, like sign me up for that today. Like, and thinking about it in that kind of space, like, why would, like, how can you want to invite people into that kind of process if you actually believe it?
Yeah, that's really good, G. Because we've talked about this before as a staff, but we're evangelizing something all the time.
Yes.
Like, and we share things with people all the time, and we don't consider that pushy all the time. Like for example, I mean, I share Star Wars with people who don't want to hear it all the time, and maybe they'll consider that pushy sometimes.
I don't, Josh. I love all your Star Wars stories.
I concur.
But we all have things that we're passionate about and that we love and that we want to like share with other people. But we kind of like put faith in this other box of like, no, I can't go there, or I don't think they want to do that. And that justifiably is because a lot of people have hurt there, and a lot of people have preconceptions about what it means for you to share faith with them.
That's so good.
And there's a level of like, I think why it comes across pushy is because, like you were saying, it kind of is, if our motivation is that, like, there's a level of examining your own motivation in this, in sharing your faith and sharing the good news. Because if you share, like, kind of just to win people on your team and kind of just to like get the burden off and be like, I gotta save people. I gotta like do my mission and do my calling and just kind of have that notion all the time.
Right.
Then it's gonna be pushy because you don't actually care about them.
Yes.
They're just projects. Like, you don't actually care about them and giving people anything.
Right.
Like, you're just kind of giving what you think is necessary to help them join your team.
Yes.
Which usually is pretty pushy.
Yeah, and no one likes being a project for anything.
Nope. And they can
Right.
tell immediately.
Yes.
And so, like, I think that in not being pushy and pursuing a way to just be genuine about sharing faith with people, you kind of have to start inside and inwardly and go, well, why do I even want to do this?
Yes. And there's like also like an element, Josh, that made me think that the reason you might not want to is that you are assuming once they know you're a Christian, all their preconceptions of Christian are instantly going to be true of you.
Yes.
So there's like an element to which your security and your identity about who God says you are suddenly gets thrown into the mix as well. You're like, I don't want them to think I'm that kind of crappy Christian that everyone sees. Like, I'm a cool Christian.
Yeah, right.
I listen to secular music.
Oh, gosh.
But like, you know, like, but like all of those things that we associate with that, you know, like is all of a sudden kind of becomes true of you. And I thought that's interesting.
Yeah. And I think just on that too, then I think sometimes we overcompensate.
Right.
And the most powerful thing you can do, and for some reason Christians tend to be really bad at this, is just be honest with someone. Like, if something that they say makes you think of a story about your faith, or like it would naturally come up with anybody else, you can be like, you know, sometimes I feel weird about talking about this, or like this can be like tricky territory, but here's kind of what that makes me think of. And like, this is just my story, and just being honest about it. I think sometimes when we don't want to be weird, or we want to avoid a certain stereotype, we can overcompensate and try to be perfect. And that comes across as also weird, or we like glorify things that we just say things we don't even mean. Yes. And there's something really, really powerful in like, sometimes I feel weird talking about this, but is really disarming.
Right. Yep. Yeah. That makes me think, Kenna, is because if your faith really is the central part of how you see the world, and it is the lens by which we understand and make decisions, and right, like if like we as Christians think and say and believe we do, then why wouldn't it just be part of you sharing the things that you care about with people that you care about? Like, if you have a friend that's like, I'm a rock climber, I love rock climbing.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you're hanging out, having a drink or whatever, and you say a story, oh, that reminds me about a time about rock climbing. You know, like, you would be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, you enjoy that.
Like, I don't rock climb, but that's cool. Yes. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. And as a friend because like, of someone that doesn't hold that same value, but like, I'm going to listen to you. And you know what might eventually happen is like, I might want to start rock climbing with you. And when I am interested in that or something happens and I'm like, I think that could be beneficial for my life, I'm like, I can go talk to Kenna because she's the best rock climber.
Can you imagine?
Seriously.
She has.
Can you
That would
imagine?
be awesome.
She has a membership to the indoor rock climbing gym.
I
She goes
so
at
wish I
5
was that
a.m.
person.
Dude.
I think rock climbers
Big
are super
fan of
cool.
Vital over
I
here.
know. Oh, come
But you know what I'm
on.
saying? Like, if you're
Yeah.
just friends with people, you
Yeah.
talk about the things that you love. And because they love you, they're okay with it, you know? So I feel like we're getting in our head a lot about some of that stuff, you know?
Yeah, well, that makes me think, like, we keep talking about kind of conversations with friends, and I think there's sometimes a fear around sharing the gospel is like this pressure that we're supposed to share it with every single person we ever come in contact with. Like, if you did not share the gospel with your checkout person at the grocery store, you are going to hell. Like, and we just think like, okay, I didn't share the gospel with 6 people today. Like, I didn't do my duty as a Christian. And like, who are we supposed to share the gospel with? Is it supposed to be people we've known for our whole lives? Is it supposed to be
That's so good
strangers? Like, is it whoever? I don't know. It's just, I think there's a tension that we feel of like, when do I know it's the right time with this person or the right person to like have some of these conversations with?
That's so, I've 100% been there. I would say that, especially earlier on in my faith, like I would say all of high school, my mindset was just like, take the opportunity, look for the opportunity, find an opportunity to talk to someone about God, like have this kind of like, this duty, this urgency that was felt because you're kind of told that, like this urgency of like, I got to let people know. I remember going on planes and sitting next to someone and being like, when do I pull the Jesus trigger?
Oh my gosh,
like,
me too, Josh.
like,
I have had the same experience.
Like when do I bring up like, so what do you think about God? Which is
like
strange.
Pretzel and you're like,
They're like, I don't even know who you are. And I remember feeling that tension for a long time. And it's strange because I feel like I've almost swung the other way in a lot of ways of like not even thinking about that. And sometimes, and I think what I've been learning is the balance of like being important to share my faith with people, honestly, all the ways we were talking about, but primarily loving people first. Because I think that my mentality was like, my motivation is it is my duty to get people on the team. Like it's my duty to save as many souls as I possibly can. Right. And so I would walk through school just looking at people like, there's the souls. Like I gotta help them.
Look at that soul.
Just like
that unsaved
which is a
soul.
ridiculous amount of pressure that you put on yourself.
And
also we can't save people.
Yes.
Like, you can't do that.
Ridiculous amount of like responsibility that I was putting on myself. And I think that it started shifting when it was like, oh, no, my primary duty or job as a follower of Jesus is to just genuinely love people. And a lot of the time sharing the gospel will come from that motivation rather than looking for an opportunity to like pull the Jesus trigger, like instead just looking for an opportunity to care for people and love people. And then as God leads me or as the Holy Spirit leads, then taking that opportunity if it appears. But just kind of trusting the Lord more and trusting that like, I'm just going to go through my day and be faithful and care for people. And then if something happens, then great. I'm ready to talk about it. Right. If not, then that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. It doesn't mean I'm being disobedient to God.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm being unfaithful. And I think there was this narrative that I especially believed that was like, oh, I just walked past that person on the street and I didn't tell them about God. Like, shoot, did I just like totally mess up?
Right.
Yeah.
There was a time I was in Vietnam with my friends Josh and Caleb Fleming back in Nam.
That was unexpected.
We all made fun of you the fact that you're 81. Like, are you actually 81?
Benjamin Button. There was this time where me and Josh and Caleb Fleming, who were two of my good friends from college,
shout out.
we were walking down the streets of, actually this was in Thailand. We were walking down the streets in Phuket.
He's also been to Thailand.
And there was all these people just walking around. We were in some, I forgot where it was, but it was just a ton of people. And I remember thinking like, I just feel the pressure to help these people know God. And I remember talking to the Flemings about that, and we had this like hour-long conversation about like, would it be right to just like get on a stool in the middle of this road and just start preaching to people? And it was like just ridiculous looking back at it. But that comes from these narratives that like, I mean, largely the church, I felt like put on me as I was learning about faith, and it can be like,
well, I mean,
heavy.
Not to like go like the same idea coming back to it is that comes from a vision of the gospel that turns it into a zero-sum game. There's like two places that you go, up or down, and you don't know. That person might walk, like I heard this, like growing up, like that person might walk out the door and get hit by a bus and they don't know Jesus. Yep. And that's your fault. And you're like, whoa, I'm 16. I'm trying to figure out my insurance for my car. like this is a lot of like pressure on me, so like that's a version of the gospel. And I'm not saying that there's not a heaven and there's not a hell. Like I do believe those things. It's just, it's not a zero-sum game like that. Like if we understand the biblical gospel that Jesus preached, that the kingdom of God is at hand, repent and believe the good news. Like there is a world where we aren't the ones that are doing the saving, that we have to learn what it means to be reliant on God's Spirit.
Yes.
And then listen. And yeah, it could be you're sitting on the plane and you're in tune with God's Spirit.
Right.
And then you talk to this person, but it's not like, do you know who Jesus is? And they're like, I just like my ginger ale.
Yeah. It's a good plane drink.
It is. It's the only plane.
It is. Why? Why is that true? But it is.
I only have ginger ale on planes.
I can't say the same.
That's so true though.
But like, our job is to stay in tune with the Spirit, have conversations and listen to what God's Spirit is saying, and usher in what it looks like for the kingdom of God to exist in this space with this person right now. Yeah. And it might be just little snippets because you're going to have them in your life for a long time. And if you don't, then you also trust that if you were faithful, God gave you every opportunity to accomplish what God hoped for you to accomplish in the time that you had with that person. Like we as Christians don't believe in time as a scarce resource. We have an eternity of it. So God will give you all the time that you need to do. Our only responsibility is to be faithful to God's voice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I love what you were saying too, Josh, both of you, about like essentially loving people first, like being attentive to the actual human being that is in front of you.
Yes.
Because the whole reason that we don't want to bring up the gospel is because of Christians who are weird and hypocritical and who do the thing where they sit on a plane and like look over and are like, do you know Jesus Christ? Yeah. That's like the whole reason we don't ever bring it up over the course of the entire plane ride is because of people like that. And so if the nicest person on the plane you found out through a conversation with them was a Christian and that was the common thing that happened, we wouldn't be embarrassed.
No. Yes. You just start talking about life and you start sharing who you are.
Right. Like if the nicest person everybody knew in every space that they were, like at their workplace and in all the spaces that they were Christians, like if that was the reputation and we just weren't weird, then we wouldn't be embarrassed either.
Right.
So like part of the time I can get really motivated by just being the nicest Christian I know.
Right. Or like if Christians were known for the reasons that they were pushed, the reason Christians were pushy was because they saw injustice or hurt or brokenness. Right. And that's what Christians, and they actually cared and loved. Like if that's what we were known for being pushy for, like that's that's the type of pushy I want to be known for.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Like this other version, I think there is a place for Christians to get up in it.
Totally.
But, and I think that it's a matter of discerning some of that stuff. But I think most of the time it's like, no, like you'll be known by how you love each other well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like maybe nice isn't really the right word, but like attentive to humans, like to the person and not caught up in like, what am I going to say about the gospel? Right. Yeah. But like, what am I going to ask you about you? Yeah. You know?
Yep. Well, and that's how Jesus says people will know who follow him, that by the way that they love each other. And like shocker there, but But it's super true. Yeah.
And I think questions like you're saying is a really good place to start. If you're feeling just like, okay, all this stuff is really helpful, these kind of tips and tricks and things to think about. And if you're still like, I don't actually know what to say, I think asking questions as like the primary way of beginning a conversation is really powerful. Like starting with, have you ever been to church? Like, have you ever thought about faith?
Right.
Have you ever wondered like why there's goodness and evil in the world? Like, have you ever wondered like, was the world created? Or
sure.
yeah, I think there's just like a lot of questions that can just start a conversation and naturally allow you to share, oh, like that's really cool that you have thought about this. Like, can I share with you what I think about X thing? Or like, I just think that if you're really practically wondering where to start, questions can be really
or even
helpful.
something that you just said, Molly, it's like asking permission. Right? Like there's like, no, actually I don't really like talking about religion. Cool.
Yeah.
And just
Totally.
move on. Like, it's like,
yeah, totally.
You know, like there's just a very, hey, like I'm a Christian. Can I share you like the Christian perspective or the Christian vision of that? Sure. Or no.
Sure.
Yeah. They're like, oh, sure. You're like, okay, I'm going to like back out.
Yeah. You must.
Like, no, or if someone's like, I like you, like you're not a weird hypocritical Christian. Like I would love to hear that from your perspective. Or like, no, like I'm not super into talking about religion. And like, then you get to be like, all right, I will honor exactly but they also know that if they do want to come back to it, you were at one point willing to talk about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And that makes it so it's not about you.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, so often when I was reflecting upon that in myself, like it was about me appeasing the tension I felt in myself. Yes. It wasn't about caring about anyone. It wasn't about loving anyone or actually helping them to know who God was. It was about like, if I'm going to be the best Christian I can be, then I got to do this. And so it's selfish too. It's a selfish way of thinking about it. And ironically, you can sin while you're trying to share the gospel.
Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah. Yeah, totally though. Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Malls, you brought up like questions about like, oh, what do you think about like the beginning of the world, or like just different like big questions that can be really fun to talk about. But also I think that it can be really intimidating as like the Christian quote unquote in the conversation. Because I think we can sometimes have a lot of fear around what if someone asks me something I don't know.
Totally.
Yeah, 100%.
Or what if I am unsure about my own answer to that question, or like what the Bible says about that question.
Yeah.
You know, and that has caught me up many times. Like, oh, well, you know, I heard that the Bible says this, and I'm like, well, I don't know. I've probably read the whole thing over the course of my faith, but I don't actually know if I have. I certainly don't have it all memorized.
Like, that does sound bad.
There's plenty of stuff that does sound bad. And I think that catches people up a lot to even begin, or once they have begun, that's kind of where the conversation can go downhill sometimes.
Totally.
And I'm curious if you guys have like tips for people or just wisdom on that, because I think that's really common.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, because there's like, because you also don't know what's happened in any of that person's life that's sitting there.
Yeah. And
let's say God's Spirit's like, hey, no, talk to them. And then this other like question comes up like, well, I don't know what question they're going to ask. And I'm definitely not going to like have all the answers because you're a finite person that has finite experiences in a finite amount of time. You're not going to have them all. And I think that in there is like just realizing that Christians should, like all of us, should feel released from having all the answers.
Yes.
Like, amen to that.
You know, like there is so much power in the phrase, I don't know, let's find out together. Mm-hmm. You know, like I've never thought of that question before.
Yeah.
That's an incredible question. I don't know the answer, but do you want to like find out the answer together?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. It makes me think about, like, Josh, what you said earlier, that like we're always evangelizing something,
Yes.
and we don't feel a need to know everything about those things that we talk about.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
it's exactly what you said, where we'll kind of put our faith in like this whole different realm, this whole different box where we do need to have every answer. We're going to blow it. But like, if you're telling somebody about like this new restaurant that you went to, that you had a great experience at, like you loved the food, you had a really great time, and you go to work the next day and you're telling somebody about it, and they're like, well, what farms do they source their food from?
I was just thinking that same thing.
Like, you're not going to freak out. You're going to be like, oh, I don't know. But like, I know it was really bomb, you know? And we like,
Oh shoot, I don't know.
I regret everything.
or like, what day did they open? Like, what you know is your experience that you had, and you are an expert on that experience. And like, that's what you have to share, and you want to share about it because you want someone else to have that awesome experience too.
Yeah.
And people want to talk to someone who is like that. Like,
Right.
people don't want to, at least I probably don't want to talk to someone who pretends to know everything and just like makes up like not fake answers, but like puts on this front to pretend like they have all of the answers figured out. And so if you feel like you don't know, you can say that. Like, if you know the answer and you sound pretty smart when you're saying it, like, go ahead and say the answer. Like,
If you sound dumb, don't though.
Yeah. If there's any hesitation in your voice, you better not say a word.
not what I mean.
Just kidding.
But I'm like having this internal battle right now of like, I like always want to sound right. And so I'm like, am I talking to myself as well? Like, yeah. But, yeah, I just think that somebody who's listening to you, even though maybe your external motivation might be they want me to have the answers, they want me to have it all together, and that is like an insecurity of yours, like, I will bet you that somebody listening to you actually will respect you more when you are honest and when you say I don't know, rather than feeling the pressure of giving them an answer for the sake of giving them an answer. Like, that's just really powerful, and it's a lot more inviting. And there is an element of like letting go of that pressure that we put on ourselves, and that insecurity we might have of not having all of the knowledge.
Well, especially when your life demonstrates you don't have all the answers.
Yes.
Because then like, we cannot say that we need and depend on Jesus and then say at the same time, but I got it all figured out. Like, the whole point is that like, you need Jesus and you don't have all the answers, and you have faith in him and you're trusting in him. So to say Josh. Otherwise is just like disingenuous, and it's not true, or setting a very good example for the people in front of you of what the Christian life is about. It actually perpetuates this stereotype that people have of Christians, that it's all about just doing the right things and being good and being a good person and checking off the boxes, and just having a certain lens of life, versus like, no, Christianity isn't about those things. Christianity is about knowing and following Jesus, which is very different. And so being honest with someone and saying, I don't know, I haven't figured that out yet, and I'm learning about it with God. All I know is I need God, and I'm not perfect. And because when you do that, it makes someone feel like they have to do a lot of work before they can come into that faith. It makes them feel like there's a lot of things that you got to do, or you got to figure out before you can get to where I am. And that's just ridiculous. It's actually not helpful to anyone to just kind of act like you need to have the answers to convince someone. So if sharing the gospel is about convincing someone, it makes sense why you feel that way, but it's not about convincing someone. It's about sharing what you know to be true, and sharing authentically that, and inviting them in.
Yes. You're inviting them into the same experience that you presently are having, hopefully.
Yep.
You can only invite people into the experience that you're having.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And that also brings up to me, like, most people, I should say just me, myself, like, I'm only, like, most people aren't interested in like question answer machines. Like, you know, like the internet exists. If you want to have that experience, there's a place to do that. Right. Like, most people are not concerned with the abstract questions of evil, or like like God as first cause, or like did God create out of nothing? Like that's like a very narrow subset of people.
Yeah, we're a little unique group.
You
I'm
know?
like, wait, really? But yeah, you're right.
You know, like, I mean, they might think about such questions, but
Right.
not in a way that drives them to like seek out the answers. Like my wife loves Jesus, but she does not care about the answers to any of those questions. You know?
Right.
Because the reason that people care about those questions is because it's embedded in a specific experience that they have. Like I first really started understanding this when I was in high school. Actually, there's a kid that I went to high school with. He was a little bit younger than me, but he had leukemia, and he was mad at God. He's like, I can't believe in a God that gives a 14-year-old leukemia. And like, I'm like a 16-year-old, like dealing with like a theodicy question. And I'm like, there's nothing I can do about this. But sure, there is a very important, hard, philosophical, abstract question about like, oh, why does God let bad things happen to good people, or let bad things happen at all? That's a really important question that we need to think about and learn and try to figure out. But also, it's embedded in this kid that's right in front of me, a peer of mine, a friend, that's his actual experience. And so if anytime anyone's like, well, I have a hard time believing in a God that, whatever the question is, right? It's actually pointing to an experience, right? Like, oh, I can't believe in a God that didn't create, like that doesn't use evolutionary processes. Like that's the thing. 7 days, that's insane. Most likely they had a terrible experience with someone that told them that was the only way to interpret the Bible. Like I can't figure out that story.
Yes.
Listen to that story.
Right.
And if you want to talk about that more abstract thing, sure, you can get there and learn. Like, I don't know the answer to that question. Like, let's go on that discovery. But it actually sounds like, how did you come across that idea?
Yeah.
What happened there? Like, listen to their story.
Yeah.
As to what occurred in their life where they have such a strong opinion about whatever question it is that they have.
Right.
You know, it could have been just something like, oh, like I went to church for forever and then I took a philosophy class and I couldn't work it out. Like, oh man, what was that process like? That was part of your life. Like, was that hard? Did you talk to your parents about it? Like, there's so much more things that are in there that, because I bet those questions are only interesting for most people insofar as they actually have real world consequences for how they've lived.
So true.
And I think when we posture ourselves to be the ones to have all the answers, we're taking on the role of like accomplishing something in the end and making sure the person, like we're carrying the burden of making sure the person gets to this end goal. And I think there's a level of taking off or like experiencing the freedom to not have all the answers is also, I think, in a same way, we get to experience the freedom of not being responsible for the outcome.
Right.
Like we get to be faithful to share our faith. We get to be faithful to share the gospel, and we get to be faithful to be obedient to God's Spirit. And then we get to trust that God does what only God can do, which is draw people to himself and reveal himself to people and like save people and forgive people of their sins. Like we don't have the power to do God's role in that. We only have the power to do what we can do as people. And so if we share and we take every opportunity in a relationship that God gives us, and ultimately someone decides like, I don't want to follow Jesus because I can't reconcile with these questions that I have, like that's not on us. And yeah, it might be really painful or difficult to experience with people that we love who are resistant or who just don't want that. But ultimately, like we get to kind of experience, maybe it sounds weird to say freedom, but like a weight, I guess, lifted off. Like we don't have to carry the burden of like, someone might walk out of their car and like get hit by a car today, and it's not our fault that like they didn't accept Jesus. Like, and yes, there's a tension that we get to hold, like an urgency, and it matters.
Yes.
And also we are responsible for ourselves. Like we all individually get to choose if we want to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh man, I had two thoughts on that, Malls. Is one, yeah, there is that tension. Like that's a good way to say that, like the urgency of it. And I think, because I don't want to, like from what I was saying earlier, I don't want to give the impression that I don't think that it's urgent. I do think so, but not for the reason of the zero-sum game of going to heaven or hell.
Right.
It's if that the best life possible is the life of following Jesus, which is like, that's a bold claim, but it's the claim that Christians make in the world. It's not that there is a God. It's that Jesus is God and his way is the best way, the most fulfilling way. The good life is found in the way of following Jesus. Like that's the Christian claim. And if that's true, then why waste 0.5 of a second doing anything else other than pursuing Jesus? Like that's everything else is a rabbit trail that's going to leave you unfulfilled, right? So there is an urgency because the eternal life is available right now. So don't wait.
Right. Yeah.
You can experience it right now. Right.
Yep. Yep.
So that's the first thought that I had, that yes, there is an urgency, but not for the reason that we think it is. The second thought that I had is like, if you can imagine, just as like just imagine yourself in any person that you life's story. You are not the hero of their story. You are the guide, right? Like in any narrative, like any story, right? Like any hero's quest journey, right? There's the hero, but then there's always the guide, the one that meets the hero on their journey that helps them figure out the way. Now, in any hero's journey, the guide is always imperfect, always flawed, past their prime. There's lots of different ways to think about it, but they're also the more powerful of the two characters. The hero is like, or at least the most, maybe more interesting or has more knowledge or whatever.
Dumbledore.
Yeah, right? Like Yoda, Dumbledore, right? Like Dumbledore is so flawed, right? Once you like learn more about him, he's a really flawed character. Don't tell Josh. He's very flawed.
He's seen the movies.
I've seen the movies.
I'm the one who hasn't.
Spoiler
They watched
to everyone
them without
listening,
me.
though.
You've seen them before, though.
I don't think I've seen all of them. Anyway.
Yoda is more powerful than Luke. Like all of them, they're the ones that have the more robust understanding of the situation, but they are there to help guide the hero. Like everyone is on their own journey. You're there to help point and cast vision as you walk alongside them, to help them accomplish that which they need to do. And that means all of us have our own hero's journey that we're on. And y'all are my guides. Y'all are my Yodas. Y'all are my like flawed Dumbledores. Are flawed. Like y'all are my like flawed Haymitch. Like, you know, like,
Dude.
But that's, I mean, that I think if you can put yourself, then that does take off some of the pressure, like you were saying, Josh. It's like, look, no, like Luke's journey was Luke's journey to walk, and Yoda was there to help, you know, and help cast vision. But ultimately, like Luke didn't even listen to Yoda half the time, you know. But like all of us, all we have to do is be faithful, like you were saying, Molly, is to present, hey, this is how I see it. But like you got a journey to walk, and I'm there with you the whole time, you know.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about having questions that we're afraid that we can't answer, I think it also makes it a purely a knowledge-based experience, or that we think that sharing faith is about a purely transfer of knowledge that people need to attain so that they can, once they get this knowledge, then they'll be Christians. And it's just like not why I follow Jesus, and not why I've really heard anyone follow Jesus. Like I haven't really met the person that's like, I follow Jesus and give my whole life to him because I learned some information about him. Mm-hmm. It was because they encountered him personally on a real interactive basis. And so, as we've said before, there isn't pressure on us to make that encounter happen. Now again, I will also say that it is important to know, like, to have some confidence about your faith and to have some knowledge about your faith, and to know the story of the gospel, like to know the story of Jesus, to know the story of the Bible, and like Garrett was saying earlier, why that even matters. But then maybe the most important is just knowing why you follow Jesus. Like that might be the most important thing that you can share with someone is why do you follow Jesus? What has he done in your life? What does that matter for you? would someone else want that if you can't actually convey that yourself? And so I think that there is some importance to like having some knowledge about what you believe. I think that matters. I think knowing some scripture matters. And I think if you're feeling insecure about that, or if you're feeling uncomfortable about that, like I'd encourage you to not just push it to the side, but like actually try to dive into your faith a little bit, try to see what are the things I don't really know that I want to know more about. And so that when you go into these conversations, you don't have to feel the pressure of having all of it right. You'll never have all of it right. No one has all the answers. But you can have some confidence of like, I know what I believe and I know why I believe it. And that can give you a lot more peace going into that conversation versus a lot of anxiety that might come up, or a lot of fear that might come up because you actually, you have some peace about it. And you know that it's not all on your shoulders, like we've been saying. It's about you being obedient and faithful to what you're invited to do, and then you let the Lord encounter them, and you invite them into spaces for them to encounter Him, not to just transfer some knowledge, because that's just not what it's about, wholeheartedly.
Right. Like what I love, it's what I hear you say, Josh, is like, to understand your why, to understand the why you follow Jesus, it's not to like have a full grasp on the cosmic biblical narrative why, right?
Yes.
Though if you want to know that, like you're saying, pursue that, have that, but like more so your personal why.
Yep.
Why you care.
Yep.
Why does God make sense to you? Yep. Why following Jesus is the thing that you've chosen to do with your life. That to me is really freaking compelling. I haven't heard it said that way before. I really like that.
And I think that leads into like a question that I've thought about around this topic is why do I even need to share the gospel at all?
Yeah.
Like why is it really important? Because I think a lot of the time, as we were saying earlier, that why was just a pressure that the church put on at least my shoulders. Sure. It wasn't, I don't think I had a thorough reasoning behind the why I was wanting to do this for people, other than like, I know I should.
Yeah, just fear.
Yes, other than just fear and being like, I'm disappointing God if I don't do it. And I think that it's important to know, I mean, as we were just saying, like, you got to know your why and why it's compelling to you, because that actually might illuminate why you need to share the gospel a little bit. Yes. Because if you believe that it's the best life possible, you're going to want to share it naturally. Right. If you don't actually believe that to be true, then yeah, it's probably going to feel like an obligation.
Yeah, and you're going to look at someone else's testimony and be like, I want the part before Jesus. You know, like
yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And so if you're there, like, I'd encourage you, before you feel any, like, the pressure to, like, go evangelize and tell everyone about Jesus, if you don't even know why you're following Jesus, like, that's where I would push you to press into. If you don't even know what is so good about this life that you claim to love so much, and you couldn't express that to someone, then I would say that's the thing to press into with the Lord. That's the thing to press into with your community, and really, like, discover what that means for you, and discover why you're following Jesus, other than just like, I made a decision and I just say I am about this now. Yeah. And so, yeah, those are some of my thoughts, but I also want to hear your thoughts around that and why we need to share the gospel.
Yeah, I think my first thought is kind of like turning the question around a little bit. I think, why do I need to share the gospel? I think if we're looking for an answer, like if that's the question you find yourself asking, like, why do I have to do this? Like, I would say because we're told to, like, by God, like to do that. Yeah. But I would say if that's the question you're asking, and it's kind of illuminated by what you're saying, Josh, like, we get to, like, we get to share this. It's so, like, it's just so basic, but
yeah.
We often ask questions like that. Like, I was having a conversation with one of our leaders the other day, like, why do we as Christians have to do these things? Like, why do we have to not gossip? Why do we have to XYZ? Yeah. And I was like, well, technically, like, we can do whatever we want. You know, we talk about that scripture all the time from 1 Corinthians, like, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Sure. And I think it's similar to sharing the gospel. Like, I guess you don't have to, but everything we're saying culminates in, if we understand who we are, who we are as children of God, who we are as followers of Jesus, what we're actually following and what we actually believe, then it would only make sense that sharing the gospel feels like an incredible opportunity and a gift rather than something that we have to do. Right. But if you're looking for a reason, like, right, we're also commanded to, like, it's like one of the last things that Jesus tells us in the Gospels. So
yeah. But I think what inside of that, Mal, and I think that's like one of the best ways. Like, we get to, like, because behind every command and even behind every prohibition, like, is actually a vision of, like, what it means for humans to flourish. Like, the reason that you don't gossip is because that's a person that's made in the image and likeness of God, and by you doing so, like, you're creating a reality about them with the words that you're having while they're not in the room, right? Like, so there is a positive belief behind that has consequences for reasons why we don't do things, right? And so the same thing, I think, with any command to do something is that underlying it is a reason and a belief about the reality of the world and the reality that we're in that God is trying to get you into. So, but if you're locked in on I guess I got to, because that's what it means to be X, a good Christian or a bad Christian, like, that's like, get underneath the question as to, going back once again to the idea of why the gospel is so good, like such good news. Yep. And also, how are you experiencing it? Right? Like, if you're not experiencing the goodness and joy of and brilliance and the sustaining, if you're in a hard season of life, the sustaining presence of God in that moment, like, I can understand why it's hard to share the gospel, because you're not experiencing the thing that you feel like you promised, or maybe you don't actually just believe that the things that are promised in it, and that's also fine. But, like, let's talk. That to me is the spot then that gets underneath it. Yeah, like, the reason why you do it is because you're experiencing a transformative life of what it means to follow Jesus, and you get to tell everyone about this joy that you found, like this treasure in the field that you're willing to sell everything for in order to go get it. You know, like,
I think on a basic level too, kind of what Molly was saying, that I think maybe if you're listening to this, you might be wanting someone to say this answer, and it's obvious that, like, yes, because people need to be saved. Like, yes, because people need to know Jesus. Like, yes, because we are sinners and we are in need of salvation. Like, yes. Like, I want that to be expressed like that. I think that's like a big deal and a big reason why we do need to share the gospel. Right. But like we've been saying the whole time, I've been thinking about it in the sense of, like, why do I get to? And it's because it's an opportunity for you to love and care for someone. Yeah. It's if you can come at sharing your faith with the perspective of, I get to share this because I actually believe it's good.
Yes.
And I actually believe it'll benefit them, and I actually want to care for them, and I actually want to love them, then I'm going to show them this, and I'm going to talk to them about this, and I'm going to demonstrate this with how I live with my life, and I'm not going to go against that with how I live with my life, and I'm not going to go like show them things that aren't about Jesus because I actually believe it. Like,
right.
And there's a level of, like, entering into actually believing that what you say you believe in Jesus is good and beneficial. And so it's then you can actually just be, I love them and I care for them and I want them to experience what I've experienced. And I also respect them enough to if they don't want me to, then I don't have to.
Right.
But why do we need to share the gospel? And I think it's largely like an opportunity to genuinely care for someone, so that they can start living the best life that you say you think is possible.
Yeah. And when someone makes that decision to do the same thing that you did and pursue the life of Jesus, like that's the moment that Jesus says like, well, yeah, like salvation has come to this house.
Yep.
Right? Like that's what it means to be saved. Like, oh no, yeah, like I want to follow Jesus. Like salvation has come. Like that's what he tells Zacchaeus in Luke 19. Like I am changing the trajectory of how I was living because this way of following Jesus is the right way. And so, there is an element to, like we want people to come to saving knowledge that Jesus's way is the best way to live in the world.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. And I feel like we have talked about so many ways that we can be more comfortable with sharing the gospel, reasons why we would share the gospel. But if you guys had to kind of summarize, like, how do you find rest in this question of how do I share the gospel without being weird, without being a hypocrite, but like genuinely, authentically, and as comfortably as I can? Like, how would you summarize that?
I would say it's similar to a couple things. First thing I would say is that you need to start when you're ready. Like start before you're ready.
Mm.
I'll make an analogy. Like people will I work with predominantly young adults, 18 to 25, and they're like, Garrett, how do I know it's time to get married? Or how do I know it's time to have kids? And I always say, you don't. You're never ready. Yeah, you don't, you're never ready. And even if you feel like you're ready, you look back and you're like, I wasn't ready.
Yep.
Totally.
Right? Because you never are ready. You never know what it means to commit to something that's going to alter the trajectory of your life. Like you might feel like you were ready when you're like, oh no, I was definitely ready to get married. I mean, there's like to a degree to which that's true, but like that's also not true.
You should have wisdom though about when to get married. Just for the record. So I'm really passionate about that.
I'm not saying you should have wisdom and discernment about it. But if you
have no idea, just go for it.
There's not an arrival point.
There's not a spot where you're I definitely am ready, because you're gonna even when you I would be willing to wager, Kenna, because you were more in the no, we're ready camp,
definitely,
right?
Yeah.
But there were still things that you're you come to and you're I don't know the answer to that question
For sure. Yes.
right? And and there's an element to which you're okay with that.
Yes.
And so you acted anyway, even though you didn't know how the question that you had was going to turn out. Mm-hmm. Or same thing with kids. You're you don't know what it means, what they're going to choose. You're well, I need to have a trajectory where they're going to go to college. And you eventually get to the spot that you're yes, I need to plan for that. But also they might not want to go to college, So until then you just find rest in the fact that you don't know the answers to those questions, and that's totally fine. And that's what I mean is starting before you're ready.
Yeah.
Is that you don't have to have everything worked out in order to start, because the phrase, I don't know, let's find out together, can take you a long way.
Yeah. I mean, and along those same lines, and it's kind of what I touched on earlier too, which is that you don't need to have all the answers, but you can know about Jesus. Yeah. And you can know how to communicate your story and your experience with him and the ways that he's changed your life. You don't have to go into that conversation completely unprepared, you get to sit with the Lord and process that story and what your why is, to your point, Josh. And you can read the Gospels and you can know, quote unquote, the answers to some questions.
Sure.
And that's actually a really helpful, beautiful thing for your own faith and something that I would recommend for your own walk. But it also helps you to have those conversations a lot better. And you've said this before, G, if you can answer someone's question, not necessarily with the answer, but just with that reminds me of a story about Jesus. that's going to be a really robust conversation,
Sure.
even if you don't know
Yeah.
the answer to the question.
Right. Yeah, I love, like, that is something that, to make it really concrete, that I'd say is that you don't have to answer the question, but it would be like, if you need like a direct takeaway from that, like start answering questions that people have about your faith as you get into these conversations with like, that reminds me a story about Jesus, and then just see what happens.
Yeah.
And then fill in the blank. Like, you don't like, sometimes I'll start like saying that, and I don't know what story is going to come out at the end.
Yeah.
And that does a couple things. Is one, it makes sure that I need to know the story of Jesus.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. But also, like, if I do, then I can actually just pick a story and just like, I'm more interested in the story of Jesus because that's the gospel.
Right.
Right. And then like, because I can talk about Jesus and know, like, there is very few people that I know of that have a problem with Jesus. Now, like, if you start pointing out some of the claims he had about reality and who he was, like, they're gonna have problems with that. But like, on the surface, people are like, yeah, Jesus is all right.
Yeah.
You know?
He seems nice.
Yeah. And so like, you just like, hey, that reminds me
Turn
of a
water
story
to
about
wine.
Jesus.
So
I'm kind of into it. I'm into wine. But like, all I have to say is like, yeah, just start a conversation. If someone asks you a question, instead of answering it directly, just say, that reminds me of a story about Jesus. And then be like,
yeah. Yeah. And if you start doing that and you know that that's your plan,
yeah,
you're going to want to read more about Jesus. And that is a good endeavor to go on.
That really reminds me of a part from The Office where Michael Scott says, sometimes you just start sentences, I have no idea where they're going.
Yeah, we can call it the Michael Scott plan for evangelism. Josh, you need to write that book.
I mean, I know I have a good friend who would be very helpful in writing that book. Nathan, if you're listening.
Oh. I was like, what's he going to say?
I think a similar, like a summary of some of my thoughts in a similar way are like, figure out if you're experiencing restlessness or anxiety around the idea of sharing the gospel because you don't feel like you know enough or you don't feel like you have a confidence in your faith, like identify the things that make you feel anxious.
Yes.
Whether that's an insecurity, whether that's a feeling of like being hurt in a church that you've been a part of, or that's like a big question that you don't know the answer to. I think a lot of times we talk about how knowing yourself is really important for growth, for relationship, for really anything that we experience in a life of faith. Like, knowing yourself is really valuable. And so for sharing the gospel, I think knowing yourself is really helpful. And so identifying the places that you feel anxious, identifying the questions that you're afraid someone might ask you, and then starting there. And not for the sake of having all the knowledge, but for the sake of building a confidence in the Lord and in yourself. And so that when you are in a scenario, you feel more prepared because you've done a lot of the work of thinking through things that might come up. And again, not to know all the answers, but to just have a better understanding of how you might be able to navigate some of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah, I think that what I would share in terms of how to share the gospel is to have a posture of love and humility and mutual need when you go to share your faith with someone, rather than sharing it as if this is something that I'm giving you, kind of like this power, like hierarchy thing of like, I'm the one with the good information that you need.
Yeah.
And so like, then you just kind of have this pridefulness about it. And instead I would say like, try to like, I guess instead of try to genuinely love someone, ask the Lord to help you to actually love people.
Yes.
Because you can't change yourself and you can't make yourself love someone more if you don't love them. I would say to begin praying for the Lord to change your heart so that you can genuinely love people and have a posture of love in all your interactions, so that what you're seeking to do is actually care for people and love them versus treating them as a project so that you can be bettered.
Right.
And instead, like, care for them, love them, recognize that you need Jesus just as much as they do, that you're a person who needs grace just as much as anyone else does. And so if you can come with that posture of humility, then I think the person that you're talking to can receive that a lot better, versus recognizing very quickly that you think you got it all together and you think you have all the answers, and that you're some sort of gift to them,
Right.
because you're not the one saving them, and get rid of that God complex.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I would say, try to have that posture of humility and love and mutual need.
Yeah, there's like no such thing as a Christian prodigy. Like you're not like,
Nope.
you're not like,
Other than Jesus.
yeah, that's right.
When he's like teaching in the temple to everyone, and they were amazed.
Yeah.
Dude, Josh, you are preaching today.
Yes, that was good, man.
Thanks, Kenna. Appreciate it.
Yes, gosh.
I mutually need Jesus.
You're not a Christian prodigy.
Please stop.
It's not that often that we compliment you.
I know we do take you to task.
We have a whole bit about
That's not true.
Today we took Molly to task a couple times. It's all right.
yeah, totally.
I'm sad you're not wearing your beanie today, Josh. That would have been really good on camera.
Yeah, it would have looked real good. I know. Sorry for all of you watching at home.
I think next podcast I'm gonna ask what the beginning question to be, what is the dumbest way you've ever hurt yourself, so that I can set Josh up for a very specific story.
Tune in next time.
because my chair question fell flat. So
He goes from 81 to 12 real quick. Story.
preview.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the convo, friends.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can stay tuned for all of our content.